Levi Monagle, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start our conversation with kind of some history. You've represented the survivors of Catholic sex abuse for over 10 years now. Most recently during the Archdiocese of Santa Fe's bankruptcy proceedings, you represented about 140 survivors through that case. Documenting abusers in a public fashion has always been something of a challenge. So from where you're sitting, where do you see things now?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that this is a debate that's happening in, diocesan litigation around the country and diocesan bankruptcies around the country. There is this big open question of what happens to records of clergy sexual abuse, what happens with allegations against perpetrators made in the course of bankruptcies. And I think it's something of a crossroads, right, for the modern Catholic Church to decide how far to lean into an ethos of transparency or how closely to adhere to an unfortunately long history of shielding damaging or sensitive information from public view.
Sure. So locally here, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe has its credibly accused list, which has the lists of priests and other clergy workers whom the Church is deemed to be credibly accused of abusing minors. Currently, there are 83 priests named on that main list, but you've settled cases involving allegations against nearly 60 additional priests, and the Church has refused to even consider adding those names to the list, despite paying millions of dollars during the bankruptcy proceedings to settle those cases. Why do you think that is?
I think that the 60 names you're referring to, these are all names that came up in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe bankruptcy. Claims were made, claims of abuse were made involving these individuals. And I think the understanding of the creditors committee, who was making decisions on behalf of the claimant body through that bankruptcy, understood that the names of those individuals would be added to the credibly accused list at the conclusion of the bankruptcy process. That didn't happen ultimately. We went to court on behalf of one survivor to try to force the Archdiocese to uphold what we believed was a cut and dried commitment made through the bankruptcy, and the judge ultimately disagreed with us and said that there was ambiguity in the language of the bankruptcy plan that allowed the Archdiocese to adhere to its traditional model, which was to retain full control over which names it added or didn't add to its list, and to handle that process through what's called its independent review board. So I think for us, that was a disappointment, obviously, right? Because the goal of our client, this abuse survivor, was to have the name of the priest who abused her, a priest named Richard Spellman, added to this list. Sure. And this is something that is tremendously important to a lot of abuse survivors, to have the validation of the truth of their allegations, to basically have it recognized by the Church that what I've said about this priest, what I've been through, this is the truth. What we saw from the Archdiocese, in my opinion, was a desire to maintain something of a monopoly over the truth-telling function in this space, basically to assert its role as the ultimate decider of who is credibly accused and who is not. And for many reasons, I think that's problematic, because that has been the role that the Catholic Church in the U.S. has assumed historically, and there was terrible damage done as a result of it, because there was obviously like a fox guarding the hen house sort of model and incentive structure for the Church to say for certain priests, regardless of what information they had, regardless of how circumstantially compelling or credible an allegation might be, to say, no, this guy's not credibly accused. So I think it's, if there's an impulse to adhere to historical practices around secrecy or transparency within the Catholic hierarchy, I think that's problematic.
So I want to get to the independent review board and those mechanisms in a minute. But first I want to talk a little bit about transparency and kind of the importance of a list like this. Certainly not everybody on this list is alive. Many of the priests and clergy workers who are named are dead. And your inclusion on the list doesn't necessarily mean that you're being criminally charged with something, right? But beyond the historical record, isn't there some sort of importance to knowing who the living abusers are and where they're working and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, for any living abuser or credibly accused perpetrator, I think that's tremendously important just as a function of communal safety to understand that an allegation involving this individual has been vetted or reviewed by an investigative body and found to be credible. I think that, there are many, many examples within the Catholic clergy abuse cases and obviously abuse cases involving other groups of credibly accused individuals slipping under the radar essentially and departing from the work they've done, as a priest or a religious individual and sliding off into some secular field like a school or, an adult care facility, a place where vulnerable people reside. And so I think that for living, abusers, having this public document listing them as such is a fundamental safety issue. There's also the reality with victims of childhood sexual abuse in the Catholic clergy context is many, many individuals are so afraid of not being believed when they come forward that in the absence of some public acknowledgement by a diocese that the person who abused them is deemed credibly accused, they won't come forward at all. And I think that the courage that it can give a survivor to know that I'm not the only one who was abused by this individual has really facilitated over the years a lot of first-time disclosures by people who have been abused and really allowed them to break out of a prison of the mind and step forward to get therapy or to get help. It's got to be very confusing.
Sure. So to that end, I want to pull back the curtain a little bit on my reporting that has led up to this. I spent months late last year and early this year untangling why the church was refusing to not just add these names to the list, but even vet these names and consider adding them to the list. And I ultimately got to the point where I needed to ask the Archbishop, John C. Wester, about this. And this is all reflected in my story, which has been published online and with the Albuquerque Journal, but it was a kind of a surprising reaction. At first, the Archbishop insisted to me that I was wrong, and he argued that these priests were, of course, named on the credibly accused list because the church had just paid over $100 million to settle their cases during bankruptcy. And that argument seemed to be based on the logic that the high dollar amount of the settlements suggests that there's some credibility behind the accusations. And after I informed him that he was mistaken and this is not the case, and I had the list in front of me and there's only 83 names on it, he put me on hold for several minutes and came back with a much different answer after that. So I'm curious, as the attorney who worked on this case, what does that signify to you?
I think I have to acknowledge that there are, reasons specific to a bankruptcy proceeding that might lead an organization like the Archdiocese not to dig too deeply into particular individual claims, that there's a desire by any organization in bankruptcy to get things done at a number that's acceptable to them. And I have heard, I think legitimate responses from deeply intelligent, deeply Catholic people in my life who say the bankruptcy process was not a credibility vetting process the way a normal litigation case would be. And I acknowledge that. I think, though, that Archbishop Wester's response was probably informed by the non-monetary commitments that he remembered making to survivors, right, through the bankruptcy process, including this written agreement to add the names of people accused in the bankruptcy to the credibly accused list. And That there were legal nuances to that his lawyers argued ultimately with the bankruptcy judge, Judge Thuma, that maybe Archbishop Wester wasn't apprised of or didn't recall in the heat of the moment. But I think that his reaction was the intuitive reaction, and then obviously had to be walked back a bit.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about who determines what's credible. Can you walk me through a little bit how the Independent Review Board works for the church?
Yeah, so I believe since the institution of what's called the Dallas Charter in 2002, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops got together and made a series of commitments to improving child safety protocols and among other things, vetting allegations against clergy accused of sexual abuse through what are called independent review boards. And the Independent Review Board for the Archdiocese of Santa Fe has been in effect since shortly after the Dallas Charter was implemented. It's made up of a mixture of lay and religious individuals, primarily, the people with professional expertise in investigations, psychologists, people from different walks of life who work with sort of on-the-ground investigators to gather information when there's an accusation against a clergy member, and then review that information, speak with abuse survivors or alleged abuse survivors, and ultimately take all this information, process it, and make a recommendation to a bishop or an archbishop as to whether or not they believe the allegation is credible. And my understanding is that generally bishops and archbishops accept the recommendations from the internal review boards or the independent review boards. And since the Archdiocese began publishing its list of credibly accused priests in, I think it was 2017, as the Independent Review Board continues to do its work and continues to find certain allegations to be credible, names are added to this public list. The Independent Review Board obviously was doing its work for 2 decades in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and the credibly accused list that was published by the Archdiocese of Santa Fe was the product of the work done by its IRB. When we were arguing this issue about naming these other 60 priests, who were accused in the bankruptcy, the Archdiocese, through its lawyers, was making the argument that we have always constructed our list based on the work of our Independent Review Board. That's how it's always been. That's how it should continue to be. And, if the language of this plan makes it look like we should be adding names to the list without the involvement of the Independent Review Board, that was never our intention, and we should not be forced to do that. And that's the position that the bankruptcy judge ultimately agreed with. I think the problem at this juncture is Archbishop Wester's indication that these names would not be subject to investigation or review by the Independent Review Board. And if the argument from the Archdiocese in court was, this is our process, this is the process we're going to continue to utilize, to then take the position after the judge has ruled on that basis that we're actually not going to utilize that process at all is very problematic to my mind.
So what about the fact then that you have a mechanism essentially of the church that then investigates the church? Does that give you pause at all? We don't really know a lot publicly about how the IRBs work. We don't necessarily know the names of the people who are on it or even what occupations they come from.
Right, yeah, I mean, in what feels like a long time ago, in years past, I had a lot more information about the composition of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe Independent Review Board at different points in time. Sure. Now that we're no longer in active litigation with the Archdiocese, following the conclusion of the bankruptcy, I'm sort of in the same position as everyone else. There's a little bit of a black box there. Like, I don't know, who's on the board at this point, what professional background they have, or anything like that. So, yeah, I mean, anytime anytime a big institution assumes the responsibility of investigating the misdeeds of its own folks, I think there's a little bit of a concern. Like, I think that in the secular space, there's, I think, checks from government and things like that on the kind of internal vetting of misconduct allegations that private companies can engage in. I mean, obviously, I think this issue isn't unique to the Catholic Church. There are plenty of examples of private institutions, secular institutions, relying primarily on the work of internal boards to suss out,
Of course.
misconduct allegations that they have a vested interest in. But again, we're talking about all of this, against the backdrop of what is held out by the church as a new era of transparency, right? And that sort of cognitive dissonance is the thing that I think a lot of people are struggling with. That how can this be a new era if it looks so much like the old one, or in some ways looks worse than the old one, right? If the IRB isn't even going to investigate these allegations. And if it's not really a new era with respect to this kind of transparency, how can we be confident that it's a new era with respect to the handling of like a new abuse allegation?
Levi Monagle, again, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.